Hey everyone, this is Major Batman in Linkira Studios, here to show you how to set up an VR rig with a working pause menu. Notice how he paused. These buttons now work. So let's show you how I did it. First step is to open up Unity Hub. Okay, so we're going to create a new project. And we're going to utilize the 2021.3.7 LTS. The template we're going to utilize is the VR template, and we can download this. And then let's name this and create the project. First thing you're presented with is this welcome screen, which tells you to go into the edit project settings and select your platform. So we'll do just that. Edit project settings, go to XR plugin management, and you can select OpenXR or Oculus. I usually utilize my Oculus Quest 2, so I usually pick the Oculus, so that allows me to air link directly into Unity and test out my solutions. However, I ran into issues during a recent game jam where when you're utilizing the PC VR, that sometimes it doesn't work for other devices. In our sample scene, we have an XR rig, a plane, and a directional light. It's kind of cool, it has a little like 3D grid on it, which is kind of neat. And in the XR rig, we have a few things. We have the camera, right controller, left controller. And honestly, at this point, it doesn't really matter because what we're going to do is we're going to utilize something a little different. Now, you can use this, but I like the XR Interaction Toolkit framework, and so that's what we're going to work on. So let's just delete that. All right, first up, we go to our package manager. We're going to go to the Unity registry. We're going to click the little advanced icon, advanced project settings, and make sure we enable pre-release packages. And you'll have to click understand. Now on this, you'll see some pre-release packages here, but the one we're looking for isn't. So once we enable the preview packages, if you're utilizing 2021.3.7 or earlier, you might not find it, and we'll have to add it by name, and I'll show you how to do that. The reason for this, actually I don't necessarily know the reason for this, but I did create a bug and I reported it, and it is fixed in later versions. So it's kind of cool that it's being fixed. So if you do find bugs, feel free to bug report them. It eventually does get fixed. I did report this in April, and in 2021.8 it is now available. As you can see here, you can install it normally. So in order to install the XR Interaction Toolkit, we need to add a package by name. So we'll copy the package name com.unity.xr.interaction toolkit, and we'll add it in Unity, add package by name, and we can do the version as 2.0.3. Click add. It kept an extra space for me, so delete that. Let's try again. And now it's there. You can import it and then go to the samples and then also import these starter assets. So we'll right click in the scene, go down to XR. We're going to add XR origin action based. If you've seen previous videos, you might have heard it being called an XR rig. It is now changed to an XR origin. So this is the one we'll select. Once we do that, we want to then right click the transform and click reset so that it's zeroed out in our space. And you'll see automatically it also creates our XR Interaction Manager, and then we have our XR rig, now called XR Origin. And if we open this up, if you hold Alt, it's pretty simple. We have the XR Origin, our camera offset, our main camera, our left-hand controller, and our right-hand controller. Okay, so the next thing to do is we go down to our starter assets, and if you didn't get the starter assets, you can grab that from the XR Interaction Toolkit and just importing the starter assets. So from there, it creates the starter assets, and what we'll do, let me show you which one to do. We grab our left-hand controller, we take the XR default left controller, we just bring it over there. And we do the same thing to the right controller. Just drag and drop, pretty simple. The left-hand controller has an XR controller, an XR ray interactor, a line renderer, and an XR interactor line visual. This is what the line would look like, and you can adjust this whether it's wider or the colors, what it's going to hit, stuff like that, even if there's a reticle. Your XR ray interactor is what it's going to interact with and what you want to do when it interacts with things. And then this is going to be the buttons, in addition to our model prefab, which we'll import in just a little bit. Now, if we open it up, we should be able to move around a controller, but we really don't see anything. There's no model attached underneath this. So now that we have the controller set up so that they have tracking states, they'll get the right buttons enabled and stuff like that, let's set up our XR origin to move. Okay, so from the XR origin, what we're going to do is we're going to add a few components. The first one being a locomotion system. This allows you to move, right? Locomotion move. And we're just going to drag the XR origin over. We don't have to do that. I believe it automatically works, but it's good to just make sure all your dependencies are lined up. Next, we're going to add an input action manager. So this allows us to do particular actions. So the first thing, we'll add one to this list, and we're going to grab the XR default input actions from our starter assets and bring that over. You could also click this little dot, and there's only one in our area, so we can just grab that. All right, next we want to have a continuous move provider on the left, right? So we want to use the left control stick, analog stick, to be able to move around in the Z and the X space. So we're going to continuous move provider action based. And so the locomotion system is up here. We'll move that down. We can adjust the speed as well. Too much, you're going to start to get into little like VR sickness type stuff. So don't mess with it too much, but you can definitely change this. So for example, you could make this so when you push further, it moves faster. So you could work on that as well. All right, and then, so at the moment, it's created, but it's not tied to anything. So let's use a reference to tie it to our left hand. And we can use an input action reference, which has all of these. And we want to use locomotion move on the left hand, XR left hand locomotion move. And that should allow you to move with your left hand. All right, and with the right hand, we want the analog stick to allow us to snap turn. I like snap turns myself, but you could also change it to a continuous turn as well. So snap turn provider is one way, or continuous turn provider, action base. So I use a snap turn. Locomotion system, again, drag your locomotion system down. Turn amount, I think 45 is a little too much. I kind of like 30 as kind of a way to get a little bit in between those. So, and then enable turn left right allows you to do both ways. And enable turnaround means if you press backwards on the stick, it allows you to just snap and turn around immediately. I used this in a recent VR game jam. It worked pretty well. So I think it's a good way to just quickly turn around in VR space without actually having to physically turn around. All right, so because we have it on the left hand already for the continuous move provider, we then want on the snap turn to be on the right hand. And so we're going to click this little dot. We're going to scroll down to the right hand, locomotion turn. All right. Next, we'll import a package. I've had this package for a little bit. It's freely available, but I'll include a link down below. So it's freely available from Oculus, just the free Oculus Hands that are included. They are just oriented right for the Oculus Quest, and so I'll include that down below in the description. So the issue is if you see that the hands are pink, the material isn't quite lined up, so I just changed the shader to a standard and it will work now. All right, so when we go to the left-hand controller and go down here under XR controller, there's a model prefab. We can just grab the prefab and bring it over. And we do the same to the right-hand controller with the right-hand model. Now, at the moment, these aren't configured to move when you press any buttons, but just having hands adds a lot to the VR space, and to do this quickly, it works well. So I think that's enough for this part, so let's test it out. I'm grabbing my Oculus Quest 2 headset. I'm opening up the Oculus Air link, which connects to my PC over Wi-Fi. Open up my primary monitor, and then press play on the Unity editor. If that's all you wanted to see, please give me a like and subscribe. I really appreciate it. But I'm going to take this a little further and show you how to make a pause menu show up on your wrist so that you can pause the game, restart it, exit it, and use that option. I like to put it on the left hand because I am right-handed, right? Use the right hand to kind of point. So what we're going to go is, so we're going to click on the left hand controller, right click, go to XR, and add a UI canvas. So the nice part about this is it automatically adds this event system, which includes this XR UI input module, and that's needed for it to kind of work and target. You can see here. It is set in world space. We're going to add 2 buttons. And we'll import TMP essentials. We'll add 1 more button. On the canvas element, we are going to add a vertical layer group. So what that means is it puts the 2 buttons and makes them stack up. So you can see it there. Now obviously, those are way too big. So we're going to click this little enable constraint proportions, and we're going to make it 0.01. We only need to do it on 1. And so that's a bit smaller. That will actually work. And then for these buttons, we can just make them a little smaller. So instead of the width of 160, maybe we make it a width of 100. And so that's probably a little more appropriate. And if we pull it into VR, this is what it'll look like. Pull it into VR, this is what it'll look like at the fingertips. And so maybe we want it a little smaller, which is fine. And then we want it a little bit up, and perhaps forward maybe would be appropriate. So let's play with those numbers here. Let's take the canvas element and we will make it go forward. Let's say about 0.5 meters. And then we want it a little bit up, so let's go with maybe 0.25. So that's a little bit up and forward. And then the buttons were a little big, so let's edit the text on both of these buttons to be auto-sized with a minimum of 8 and a maximum of 30. Let's go back to edit the buttons, and let's make it a width of 60 and a height of 20. So there's a little faint there, but we can see that how the height of the canvas is affecting it. So if we change the height here to maybe a little something smaller, like 50, now they're stacked on each other. All right, next let's change the button text. So let's make this one restart and the bottom one exit. So let's test that out in game. 1 second. So we have a little controller button here, and then you can see that when I use my raycaster to go over these buttons, it changes to white. So the idea here is that I can click the button, and you can click it and you can see how it kind of shows a little highlight like I clicked the button. We can mess with this a little bit more, but I think for the purposes of what we want, it works. So let's work at the next step. So let's create a C# script and name this pause menu. Okay, now that we have the menu open, we want to add a few extra library calls. The first is scene management, and the second is the input system. All right, then we want a reference to this wrist canvas, this wrist UI that we have. We'll just make it public. And then finally, we want to have a boolean to determine whether or not the wrist UI is active. it'll start off as true. And when it begins, we are going to have it display the wrist UI. That implies that we need to create a wrist UI function. And make sure to make it a void. So the idea here is if the wrist UI is active, so it's currently there, what are we going to do? And then if it isn't, what are we going to do? Right? So the idea is like we could press it once or twice and we can make sure to get the right instance to occur. So you press the pause button, it opens the menu. Press the pause button again, it closes the menu. So let's write that out. So if the active wrist UI is true, and we can just write it this way, it makes it a little easier, but you could also do a comparison. And then otherwise, else if not active wrist UI, then we're going to do another set of actions. So if it is true, we want to then make this wrist UI instance and set it to false. So this basically turns it off. And then we want to also make sure that our reference to whether it's on or off gets set. So let's do the opposite for if it's hiding, what are we going to do? So let's make it set it active true. And then make the Boolean true as well. Okay, that's pretty good so far. Next, what we wanted to do is, since this is a pause menu, we wanted to actually pause it, right? So we're going to add in a time.timescale. So we're going to add the time.timescale being 0 and 1. Right, so the idea is if the pause menu is on, we know that the timescale is going to is already 0, and then when we press it again, it sets it back to 1, and the opposite is true. So if it's hiding, we press the pause button, we display the pause menu, and then we're pausing the timescale. Kind of cool. Now, if your game doesn't need to slow down the timescale, you can just disregard this portion. All right. Next, what we want to do is we want this to actually do something when we press the pause button. So let's do that. So we're going to create a new function that just does this. So we're going to call it pause button pressed, and then we're going to make it input action.callback context, and we'll just have it a context. This is how the new input system works, but basically, what is the context button of what we're sending back? What's the button pressed? And then what this allows us to do is use the Unity Editor UI to point it to this function. And so if the context is performed, right, then we want it to call the display wrist UI. Right? So now we have this wrapper of this callback context being pressed, the pause button, and it's going to display wrist UI. Finally, what we want it to do is have the restart and exit game buttons. Let's make them actually work, right? So public void restart game, and we will do scene manager dot load scene manager dot get active scene build index. So this reaches into the scene manager class. It finds out the current active scene with the build index number, and the load scene requires a build index number, so that's why we do it this way. So the idea is no matter what level or world you're building, it will get the current scene and restart that level, which is a little helpful. And then let's create a exit game button as well. And this is a simple application.quit. Very easy to overlook. A lot of VR games, they fail to have this information or a way to really quit it without actually pressing the Oculus button, then force quitting the game, which is kind of like requiring someone to press Alt F4 to exit out of the game, which isn't, I think, the appropriate manner. All right, so this is the code. Let's clean up this update here. We don't need an update here. And let's scroll down one more time. So we have Unity Engine, Scene Management, Input System. We have a reference to a wrist UI, public boolean of our wrist UI. At start, we call it once, right? So it's displayed first. Then when we press it, the idea is it goes in here and sets it to false and initiates the timescale. And then we have the wrapper for our callback context, and then we have our two buttons. So let's save this. So we could put this anywhere. Let's put it on the left-hand controller because that's where the canvas lies. So let's copy over the wrist UI element here. And then for these buttons, on click, so this is the restart button. We bring the left-hand controller over, and then we want it to, on the pause menu, to restart the game. And then for the other button, we're going to drag over our left-hand controller here as well, go down to the pause menu and exit game. So now both of those buttons will work. The only thing missing now is the wrapper element. All right. So now that we have the pause menu set up, we need the wrapper so it actually talks to our VR controller. So I'm just going to go into the starter assets and we're going to right click and create, and down at the very bottom is the input actions. And we'll, since the other one's called default input actions, we'll call this custom input actions. Let's open that and let's click autosave just in case we don't save it. We're going to create an action map. You can really name this whatever. I'm going to name it menu because that's what we're going to work on. And then for the action, we're going to make it do the menu press. So these are specific action maps that we can call back, and that's the context that we're going to do. And it's going to check to see if any of the bindings below are pressed. So we're going to add a binding, and I haven't had much luck in this in figuring out which works what, and it could be because I'm using the Oculus versus the XR. But if we go to XR controller, down at the bottom for specific XR controllers, because I'm using the Oculus Quest, and then select the start, this works for me. Now for you, you might have to go in and find and do a few different ones until you get the right one that works. So it might require a little testing, but for the Oculus Quest 2 with the Oculus set in the preferences, the start Oculus touch controller works for me. The next thing is we're going to go to the XR origin. We're going to add a component called player input. In it, it requires an actions asset. So now we have two. We have the custom and the XR default. We're going to use the custom because that's what we created. And this chooses a default map. So what is the map that we're going to use? And we're going to use the menu. That's the one we decided on. For the behavior, instead of sending messages, we wanted to invoke a Unity event. And this creates a UI that is very similar to like the buttons we just dealt with. And in the menu context, there is one action, the menu pressed. So when menu pressed, it's going to check to see which of the buttons that we bound to this action, when they're instantiated, it's going to do something. So we're going to add this plus, and at runtime, we want it to look at the left-hand controller, and we want it to go to the pause menu, and we want to use this dynamic callback context pause button pressed. And now if you don't see that, you probably didn't invoke in the library the input actions. So go back and make sure that is done. So we're going to select this, pull it into VR. This is what it'll look like. And so we have our hands, they move. I can move left and right. I can move around and see him from different angles. And when I pause, he stops. And in addition, I can turn. I can only turn once, but I can't move around either. So that's nice to know. And then I have my 2 buttons. I added an extra little UI element to it to make it a little more pretty. And you can click it and it restarts back from square one. The exit button won't work for this, but you can see that the pause does stop. And if I press it again, back to normal. He's moving. So I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. I'm Major Batman Lakira Studios. Please give me a like and subscribe. Hope you have a great day.